Hey there and welcome back to another Dreamworks video. And today, I want to talk a little bit about the franchise Shrek, and more importantly, the character of Shrek, and how impressive it is that Dreamworks was able to create such a sympathetic and deeply layered character over the course of their 4 films, whilst also keeping him as one of the most unlikable protagonists in their library. Like, don't get me wrong, I very much enjoy the Shrek franchise, or at least the first 2 films, and I actually really like Shrek as a character. He's funny, he's enjoyable, he's one of the main reasons why the films are so successful. Him being a major asshole doesn't change that he's a well-written and exciting character, and it doesn't change that he's the main protagonist. But just because he's fun to watch, and at his core he is a good person, or a good ogre, it doesn't make him nice, or really all that likable when you boil it down. He's a bit unpleasant if you take him at face value. It's like they say in the film, ogres have layers, much like onions. And much like onions, or raw onions anyway, it's a very unpleasant experience peeling back the layers, and you'll just end up in tears. And so, when we first meet Shrek during the events of the first film, he isn't very nice. He's angsty and grumpy and kinda cruel. He only really cares about himself, and very much wants to be left alone to his own devices. Almost none of his interactions with the majority of different characters in the film are positive ones. He doesn't want to let people in, so he lashes out with anger to try and scare them away and keep up his defenses. Despite the fact that Donkey is a friendly creature and is interested in actually getting to know Shrek and being kind to him, making a friend, he refuses to allow him to remain in his presence and takes every opportunity to insult and degrade him. He's wholly unsympathetic to the plight of the fairy tale creatures who are being persecuted by Lord Farquaad, and he doesn't care where they get sent, he just wants them gone. For all he knows, they're going to get killed or sent off to a prison camp. After all, the guards earlier say that Donkey needs to be sent to a designated resettlement facility, a very vague statement that sounds suspiciously like an internment camp. But like I said before, as long as it doesn't affect him, who gives a shit? He then makes a deal with a terrible, terrible person to have them removed from his swamp, probably by force, in exchange for one thing: rescuing a princess from a dragon. Pretty heroic, honestly, until she refuses to go with him, and so he, against her will, abducts her to basically sell her into a marriage that she probably wouldn't want, as the idea was that she was supposed to be rescued by a brave and noble knight, not traded for by a cowardly despot who couldn't even be bothered to come himself. And of course she'd be forced to consent to the wedding or else. And this in turn would hand the kingdom of Far Far Away, which seems to be a much nicer and happier realm than Duloc, right into the hands of Farquaad, simply so that Shrek can have some peace and quiet in his swamp, and so that he doesn't have to share it with anybody. And on paper, that synopsis doesn't paint him in a very good light at all. And I think that's kind of the point of the story, to craft a person that's on paper not a nice guy. Somebody who seems like they need a bit of a personality transplant. But then on the other hand, we see the story from his point of view. We follow him. And thus, we're already inclined to be a little bit more sympathetic to his perspectives, even if he is a bit abrasive. So already, this means that the audience is primed for his redemption. And I use the term redemption loosely, because it's not like he's ever the villain. But the audience is more ready to peel back those layers of his character and uncover new elements that weren't as readily apparent before. We see flashes of this early on, when he's sometimes kind to Donkey, or when he helps him with his fear of dying as they cross the lava bridge to fight the dragon, or simply when he rescues him from being Dragon's consort for the rest of his life. He shows that he cares. But it's when he rescues Princess Fiona that things start to really get going in terms of his personality shift. Because after a bit of a rocky start, she shows him that she's more than what he assumed she was. That she doesn't judge him for being an ogre, she isn't afraid of him, and she enjoys a lot of the same things that he does. She's accepting of him, she's kind to him. And this is where we start to see those layers peel back as he unlocks the hidden marshmallow man that lives underneath all the bitterness and anger. And once he's had that initial breakthrough, everything sort of clicks for his character. Suddenly that abrasive personality, it's shown to be a front, a defense mechanism because ogres are hated in this world and are treated badly because of it. And this explains his attitude in the first half of the film and his selfish perspective on life, the reason he's so out for himself. But of course, this all goes to change as he falls in love and he realizes that Donkey is a true friend, and then he risks everything to try and prevent Fiona from making the mistake of marrying Lord Farquaad. And so we get our happy ending for the time being, until we arrive at Shrek 2 and we get a deeper understanding of why Shrek acts the way he does, why he's often so prickly, why he can be so argumentative and closed off. We see him meet Fiona's family and the people of the kingdom that they rule, and it doesn't really go too well. Besides her mum, nobody's really accepting. They look at him as a freak, a monster, a beast, and her dad in particular, who in my opinion is one of the worst villains in the entire franchise, treats him like garbage. He degrades his heritage, acts racist, speciesist, whatever, I don't know. But regardless, he's bigoted towards him for being an ogre and implies he'd eat his own children given the chance. And after that, after thoroughly insulting him all evening, and apologising and asking if they can start again and try to get along, he takes out a hit on him and sends Puss in Boots to try and kill him. So really, this just acts as a big old explanation as to why he acts the way he does at the beginning of Shrek. Why he's so guarded and closed off. Because everyone's out to get him. And out to get him for a reason that he can't control. And I think this is really strong and meaningful characterization, and his arc's really well handled throughout these first two films. And I also just want to acknowledge that despite this storyline requiring him to be quite an unpleasant character in a number of ways, the writers were still able to cast him in a likeable fashion. First, by making his actions and behaviours understandable and sympathetic in hindsight, by having him be a victim who's endured prejudice his whole life, and then just by making him generally funny. Whilst he's not always kind or even a reasonable person, he's always funny, and he's sarcastic, and he's witty and clever. He makes humorous observations and quips. The banter can be off the charts with Shrek sometimes. And I think the way they blend these two halves of the character together is actually really well done. And although most people probably don't sit there and say their favourite character from the franchise is Shrek, they'll go and say Donkey or Puss in Boots or maybe Gingy, but of course, never Shrek. I think the writing for him, in the first two films at least, is perhaps some of DreamWorks' best ever character development. And I think it's a shame that not as many people as you'd probably expect talk about it. I mean, maybe that's because in Shrek the Third and Shrek Forever After, they sort of relegate his arc to being a typical dad who doesn't want kids / is nervous about having kids and tries to avoid it. And then after they're born, he becomes the typical, oh, I wish things could go back to the good old days, dad, which is honestly really bland writing and is very, very generic. And thus, I think it did taint people's perceptions of Shrek's arc of overcoming negativity and his own battle with self-doubt and xenophobia to learn to open his heart to others and accept that people can love him for who he is. So yeah, apart from Shrek the Third and Shrek Forever After, good on you DreamWorks. Shrek is one of the best written characters in animation, bar none. But of course, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of Shrek's character? Do you like it? Hate it? Think it's well written? Badly written? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.